What if the person who invited you into their home had already decided you would never make it back to yours? What if the smile, the laughter, the casual conversation were all part of a plan? And what if the person you trusted most was quietly watching the clock, waiting for the right moment to end your life? This is not a story about a dark alley or a masked stranger. This is a story about friendship, about trust, about a mother of three who believed she was safe because the danger was wearing a familiar face. She was the kind of woman people described as dependable. A mother first, always. Every decision she made revolved around her children, school runs, packed lunches, late-night homework checks, and whispered prayers before bed. Friends knew her as warm and loyal. Family knew her as strong. Her children knew her as home. On that day, nothing felt unusual. The morning began like any other. She woke early, prepared her children for school, exchanged quick hugs, and reminded them she would be back before nightfall. She had plans later that day, nothing extravagant, nothing risky. Just a visit, a friendly invitation from someone she knew well, someone she trusted. The friend had called earlier in the week. Her voice was light, familiar, comforting. "Come over," she said. "It's been a while. We should talk." There was no urgency, no argument, no sign of trouble. Just two women, connected by friendship, planning to spend a few hours together. For a busy mother of three, it felt like a rare moment to breathe, to sit, to talk like adults do when life slows down, even briefly. She agreed. As she got ready, she didn't sense danger. She didn't leave a note explaining where she was going, because she didn't think she needed to. She had been to her friend's place before, many times. Nothing bad had ever happened there. Why would today be different? When she arrived, the atmosphere felt normal. The door opened. There was a smile, a hug, familiar surroundings, voices overlapping as they caught up on life. The kind of visit that happens every day, everywhere, without consequence. They talked about children, about stress, about relationships, about money, about life. The conversation drifted, sometimes light, sometimes serious. If there was tension beneath the surface, it was invisible. If there was resentment hiding behind the laughter, it never showed. Time passed. Outside, the day slowly shifted toward evening. Inside, nothing seemed wrong. No raised voices, no struggle, no obvious warning sign. To anyone watching, it would have looked like two friends simply spending time together. Eventually, the visit came to an end. The mother stood up. She mentioned needing to get home. Her children would be expecting her. Dinner still needed to be made. The routines of motherhood waited for no one. The friend walked her to the door. Another hug, another smile, a casual goodbye. That moment, the final exchange between them, would later be replayed in the minds of investigators, family members, and the public. Because somewhere between that goodbye and the road home, something unspeakable happened. She stepped outside, completely unaware that this was the last time anyone would see her alive. As she began her journey home, her phone remained quiet. No distress calls, no messages asking for help, no sign that she sensed what was coming. To her family, everything still felt normal. She was just on her way back, but she never arrived. When evening turned into night and she still hadn't returned, concern began to grow. At first, it was mild. Maybe traffic. Maybe she stopped somewhere. Maybe her phone battery had died. Then, worry deepened. Calls went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. The hours stretched longer than they should have. A mother who never stayed out late, who never disappeared without explanation, was suddenly gone. By the time panic set in, it was already too late. Authorities would later piece together her final movements. They would retrace the route she was expected to take. They would analyze timelines and phone records. And they would ask a question that no one had considered earlier that day. What happened after she left her friend's house? At that moment, the friend was not a suspect. She was simply the last known person to see her alive. A detail that would grow darker with every passing hour. As the search intensified, hope slowly began to fade. Because cases like this rarely end the way families pray they will. The silence was heavy. The absence spoke louder than words. Somewhere between trust and betrayal, a line had been crossed. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. Whatever happened next was personal, planned, and rooted in something far deeper than anyone could see from the outside. A mother of 3 had accepted an invitation from a friend, and she never made it home. In the next part, investigators uncover what happened on that road, and the first cracks begin to appear in the story of the woman who claimed to be just a friend. By the next morning, fear had replaced hope. The night had passed without any word from her. No missed calls returned. No message explaining the delay. For a woman who never disappeared without notice, the silence was deafening. Her family knew something was wrong long before authorities confirmed it. Reports were made. Names were written down. Timelines were questioned. The search began not with certainty, but with dread. Investigators started where they always do, by reconstructing the last known movements of the victim. The final confirmed location was clear. She had been at her friend's house. She had left on her own. There were no reports of an argument. No neighbors had heard screams. Nothing appeared out of place. But disappearances don't happen in a vacuum. Police traced the route she would normally take home. It was familiar, a road she had driven many times before. Nothing about it was dangerous. No reputation for crime. No sharp turns or isolated stretches that would immediately raise alarms. And yet, somewhere along that road, her journey ended. Hours into the search, a discovery shifted the case from missing person to suspected homicide. Her car was found. It wasn't where it should have been, parked at an unusual angle, away from her normal route. The vehicle raised immediate questions. The doors were closed. The keys were not in the ignition. To the untrained eye, it almost looked ordinary. But investigators knew better. Cars tell stories. And this one was saying she hadn't simply walked away. Inside the vehicle, small details felt wrong. Personal items were left behind. Things she would never willingly abandon. There were no signs of a struggle obvious enough to be seen from a distance. But the absence of order spoke volumes. Then came the discovery no family ever wants. Not far from where the car was found, her body was located. The scene was quiet. Too quiet. There was no dramatic chaos, no scattered evidence suggesting a random attack. What investigators found instead was something far more chilling. Signs that this was deliberate, controlled, personal. The official confirmation hit her family like a physical blow. A mother of 3 was gone. A life ended not by accident, but by intention. As the investigation deepened, the question shifted from where to who. Who would want her dead? Friends and family were interviewed. Co-workers were questioned. Anyone who had interacted with her in the days leading up to her death became part of the timeline. Yet nothing immediately stood out. She had no known enemies, no dangerous associations, no history of conflict serious enough to explain murder. That's when attention turned back to the friend. The same woman who had invited her over. The same woman who had hugged her goodbye. The same woman who was the last confirmed person to see her alive. At first, the friend appeared cooperative. She expressed shock, sadness, confusion. She told investigators the visit had been normal. Just 2 friends talking. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth mentioning. But detectives are trained to listen not only to what people say, but how they say it. Small inconsistencies began to surface. Her timeline didn't align perfectly with phone records. Her recollection of events felt rehearsed. Certain details changed slightly each time she spoke. Not enough to raise public suspicion, but enough to make seasoned investigators take note. Then came the digital trail. Phone data revealed something unsettling. The victim's phone showed movement after she supposedly left alone. Signals that didn't match her usual driving pattern. Stops that didn't make sense. Moments of silence where there should have been activity. CCTV footage from nearby roads added another layer. Grainy images captured vehicles passing through key intersections around the estimated time of death. One vehicle appeared where it shouldn't have been. A car investigators now recognized. It belonged to the friend. The story she told, that the visit ended peacefully and the victim drove straight home, was beginning to unravel. Witnesses also came forward. Someone recalled seeing two cars together on the road that evening. Another remembered a tense interaction near where the car was later found. Each statement alone meant little. Together, they formed a pattern of pursuit, a pattern of control, a pattern that suggested the victim may not have been alone on that road after all. As detectives pressed further, they uncovered cracks beneath the surface of the friendship. Private messages revealed jealousy, resentment, words filled with bitterness masked as concern, issues that had never been spoken aloud, but had been quietly festering. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was personal. The road she never finished wasn't just a stretch of asphalt. It was the final stage of a plan that had been forming long before that invitation was ever sent. Investigators now believed the visit itself had been calculated, a way to establish an alibi, a way to place herself as the last trusted contact, a way to control the narrative before the crime even occurred. The realization was devastating. A woman had walked willingly into the presence of someone who intended to harm her, not out of fear, not out of force, but out of trust. As the evidence mounted, the friend's demeanor changed. Calm gave way to defensiveness. Cooperation turned into silence. The woman who had once spoken freely now chose her words carefully, or refused to speak at all. Police were closing in. The road that ended the victim's life was now leading investigators straight back to the person she trusted most. And in the next part, the mask would finally come off, revealing the motive so dark it shocked everyone. By the time investigators returned for another interview, the atmosphere had changed. This was no longer a routine conversation. The evidence had shifted the direction of the case, and the friend could feel it. Her once open posture became guarded, her answers shorter, her pauses longer. She was no longer just a witness. She was becoming the center of the investigation. Detectives laid out the inconsistencies carefully. They didn't accuse her outright. They didn't raise their voices. Instead, they let the facts speak. Phone records, CCTV images, timelines that refused to align with her version of events. At first, she tried to explain them away. She said she had gone out briefly after the visit. She said she couldn't remember exact times. She said stress might be affecting her memory. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. But together, they painted a picture of someone struggling to keep a story intact. Then investigators introduced the messages. Private conversations pulled from her phone revealed a side of her no one had seen publicly. Texts filled with bitterness, complaints about feeling overlooked, comparisons that hinted at envy, subtle insults masked as jokes, a growing resentment toward the woman who would later be found dead. To outsiders, their friendship had seemed normal, supportive, balanced. But beneath the surface, something ugly had been taking root. The victim had things the friend believed she deserved: stability, respect, a sense of fulfillment. And rather than confront those feelings, she let them fester in silence. Jealousy, when ignored, doesn't fade. It mutates. Investigators uncovered financial strain as well. Debts, unpaid bills, a lifestyle she couldn't maintain. Meanwhile, the victim, though not wealthy, was managing, providing, standing strong for her children. That contrast mattered, because motive doesn't always come from hatred alone. Sometimes it comes from comparison, from the belief that someone else's existence is proof of your own failure. The breaking point, detectives believed, had come quietly. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just a decision made internally, long before the invitation was sent. The visit was never about catching up. It was about opportunity. As pressure increased, the friend's behavior grew more erratic. She contradicted herself, forgot details she had previously emphasized, grew emotional at moments that didn't align with the gravity of the situation, then oddly detached when discussing the victim. Seasoned investigators recognized the signs. This was someone unraveling, When confronted with the CCTV footage placing her car near the scene, she hesitated. For the first time, she couldn't explain it away immediately. Her silence stretched too long. Her eyes darted. The confidence she had carried since the beginning cracked. Then came the question she hadn't prepared for. Why follow her? The room went still. There was no good answer. No innocent explanation that fit the evidence. The investigators didn't need a confession yet. They just needed to apply pressure and let the truth surface on its own. And slowly it did. Piece by piece, the story changed. She admitted she had driven in the same direction. She admitted they had spoken again briefly after leaving. She admitted she had been angry, hurt, frustrated. What she didn't admit, at least not at first, was intent. But intent was written all over the evidence. The medical examiner's report confirmed the violence wasn't accidental. The injuries were consistent with a deliberate act. One that required proximity, control, time. This wasn't a crime committed in panic. It was a crime committed with resolve. As detectives connected the dots, the full picture emerged. The friend had followed her, confronted her. What began as a conversation escalated into something irreversible. The exact details would later become the subject of courtroom testimony, but the outcome was undeniable. A mother of 3 lost her life at the hands of someone she trusted. The arrest came quietly. There were no flashing lights in front of cameras, no dramatic chase. Officers arrived, read her rights, and placed her in handcuffs. Neighbors watched in disbelief as the woman they knew was led away. Some cried, some shook their heads. Others simply stood in silence, trying to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the crime she was accused of committing. When the news reached the victim's family, grief mixed with shock. The betrayal cut deeper than the loss itself. To know that the person responsible had once been welcomed into their lives was almost too much to process. Her children were told their mother was never coming back. No explanation could soften that truth. As the case moved toward court, more details surfaced. Investigators learned the friend had rehearsed parts of her story in advance. She had searched for information online. She had thought about how to explain the night if questions were asked. These were not the actions of someone who snapped. These were the actions of someone who planned. Psychologists later testified about the role of envy, insecurity, and unresolved resentment, about how small grievances, left unchecked, can grow into something monstrous. But explanations didn't bring comfort. Nothing could undo what had been done. The trial would eventually expose every detail to the public. The text messages, the movements, the lies. Each revelation added another layer to the betrayal. The image of friendship shattered completely. What remained was a stark warning. The most dangerous intentions don't always come from strangers. They come from people who know your routines, your trust, your vulnerabilities, people who smile while hiding something dark. As the courtroom doors closed and the accused faced justice, one truth became painfully clear. This crime was never about chance. It was about proximity. It was about access. It was about a friend who was never truly a friend at all. And in the final part, the court delivers its judgment, leaving behind a legacy of loss. And a lesson no one who hears this story will ever forget. The courtroom was silent when the trial began. Every seat was filled. Family members sat stiffly, bracing themselves for details they never wanted to hear. The accused sat motionless, her expression carefully controlled. Gone was the familiar smile people once trusted. In its place was a face hardened by consequence. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the story from beginning to end. The invitation, the visit, the drive, the confrontation, each moment reconstructed with precision. Evidence was presented methodically, piece by piece, until the narrative became impossible to deny. Jurors listened as phone records were projected onto screens. Messages once private were read aloud in open court. Words filled with resentment echoed through the room, exposing thoughts the accused had never meant for the world to see. CCTV footage followed. Grainy images, time-stamped and unforgiving. the same car, the same route, the same moments the accused had sworn never happened. Witnesses took the stand. Experts explained how jealousy can evolve into obsession, how perceived injustice can twist into justification, how resentment left unchecked can become deadly. The medical examiner spoke next. Her voice was calm, professional, detached. She described injuries with clinical accuracy. Each sentence confirmed what the family already knew, but still struggled to accept. This was not an accident. This was not self-defense. This was intentional. When the victim's name was spoken, her children shifted in their seats. They were too young to fully understand the legal language, but old enough to understand the absence. Old enough to know their mother would never walk through the door again. Old enough to feel a loss that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The defense attempted to humanize the accused. They spoke of stress, of emotional instability, of poor judgment in a moment of overwhelming feeling. They argued she hadn't meant for things to go so far. But intent doesn't vanish because regret appears later. The prosecution reminded the jury of planning, of preparation, of lies told calmly and repeatedly. They emphasized that this crime was not a sudden explosion of emotion. It was a decision. After days of testimony, the jury deliberated. Those hours felt endless to the family. Every tick of a clock echoed. Every whispered conversation carried weight. When the jurors finally returned, the room stood still. The verdict was read. Guilty. There were gasps, quiet sobs, heads bowed in relief and sorrow all at once. Justice had been served, but justice could not restore what had been taken. The sentencing followed. The judge spoke firmly, addressing the gravity of the crime. He spoke of trust betrayed, of lives shattered beyond repair, of children forced to grow up without a mother because of one person's choice. The sentence was handed down, a lifetime marked by bars and locked doors. As the accused was led away, she finally broke down. Tears streamed down her face. Her composure collapsed under the weight of reality. But for the victim's family, the moment brought no satisfaction. It was too late for remorse. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Headlines spread quickly. A story that began with friendship ended with a conviction that stunned the community. People asked the same question again and again. How could this happen? The answer was uncomfortable. Because danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits across from you, sharing laughter. Sometimes it listens to your struggles. Sometimes it pretends to care. The victim's family chose to speak publicly once. They talked about her kindness, her devotion to her children, her strength. They wanted the world to remember her for how she lived, not just how she died. She trusted, one family member said. She believed in people. That trust had cost her everything. Her children were placed in the care of relatives. Birthdays came and went. School events passed. Every milestone carried an empty space where their mother should have been. Grief didn't fade with time. It changed shape. It became quieter, heavier, something they learned to carry rather than escape. The friend's name faded from conversation. The community stopped speaking it aloud. Some stories are too painful to repeat. Others serve as warnings. This one became both. Psychologists later analyzed the case in studies. They pointed to envy hidden behind affection, to resentment masked by familiarity, to the danger of ignoring emotional warning signs simply because they come from someone close. But the lesson extended beyond psychology. It was about boundaries, about intuition, about understanding that proximity does not equal safety. The final police report closed with facts and dates, but the real ending lived elsewhere, in the lives permanently altered by one decision. A mother who never came home, children who grew up too fast, a friendship that revealed its true face far too late. Today, the road where her life ended looks ordinary. Cars pass, people walk by, life continues, unaware of the tragedy that unfolded there. But for those who know the story, it will never be just another stretch of pavement. It is a reminder A reminder that trust should never silence caution. A reminder that not everyone who invites you in means you well. A reminder that sometimes the greatest threats come wrapped in familiarity. Because the most terrifying truth of all is this: the danger wasn't on the road. It was waiting long before she ever left the house. And that is the story of how a simple invitation turned into a lifetime of loss. One that should never be forgotten.